All right, welcome again to the Think Orphan podcast. I'm Rick Morton, along with Phil Dark. Phil, how's it going today in California?
It's going pretty well, although, it's interesting with all the things we have going on. A couple things over the last 2 days. We got COVID, right? Obviously going on for a while. We have all kinds of other things, school starting, kids distance learning in our home, all kinds of other things. And then we find out in South Lake Tahoe, the plague came up and someone had the plague the other day from some insect. And then we have wake up this morning and go out to my car and there's a layer of ash on the car because there's fires, popping up all around. So it's just a crazy time, as we already knew. And, on top of it, I was reminded as I listened to the episode with DJ Jordan a couple times ago that we left people hanging on the whether I had COVID or not.
Yeah, we sure
after
did.
that episode a couple times ago. And so I just want to say I apologize for switching the order a little bit on our episodes of when we recorded them. And I will say happily, though, that I was COVID negative. And I was pretty darn sure I had COVID, as with 99% of our country who hasn't had COVID yet. I think we're pretty sure we had it at some point this year. But I got the antibody test and it said negative as well. So not out of the woods. But anyway, it's been just a crazy time, as I know you've been having a crazy few weeks since we last recorded as well. And just how are you doing?
Man, I'm good. We're launching two seniors into their last year of high school and two seniors in three different schools, and there's a lot of complexity, and COVID just adding to that's made it nuts. We're like over here toward the east, we're trying to act like the West Coast, and so we're having earthquakes over this way and all kinds of craziness here, and so life just continues to go on. And I think today, even as we're getting into the show, that man, we're having a moment of craziness on the show here today, because I can't believe that our guest who we have today with us, that we are over 150 episodes into this podcast, and this is the first time we've had him on. And so that's just crazy to me that somebody that's as close to you and somebody that's as big a part of your life and your story is like, we're just getting a chance to talk to him for the first time. And so in the midst of life being topsy-turvy and all that, we're going to do something really, really cool today. So man, why don't you tell us about our guest?
Yeah, today we have he's become a brother to me after we were able to co-write and co-edit In Pursuit of Orphan Excellence a few years ago. Keith McFarland, who has been, the reason he hasn't been on the show is because he and his family have been living over in Uganda for, really the last 15 years. And he comes home on furlough here and there, but really crazy. And he's also one of the most humble men you'll ever meet. He doesn't like to share about himself. And quite frankly, part of the reason I haven't had him on either is Rick, I'm not a self-promoter. I don't like just putting it out there and saying, oh, look at me. And I feel that I don't want people to ever think that the reason we did this was to sell stuff or do this or do that. Never has been, never will be. But I've always known.
What fun, man! Like, this is awesome, and it's really, like, I'm really excited about today.
I am
too.
To
get the two of you guys together on the show, and to be able to do this. And so I'm thankful Keith's in a place where internet's good and reliable, and we can have this conversation. And I'm thankful that we're able to get you guys together, and we're able to talk about some really important things
Absolutely. So without any more, and I do want to say on a side note, we haven't had Tony on the show either, which is, something
let's do it.
I know.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Let's have like the series of our co-authors, just, boom, back to back to back. And actually, it could just be back to back, but that's okay. We haven't written as much as Peter Greer. But anyway, he'd have a whole podcast of just his co-authors.
Just his co-authors, right.
Anyway, folks, so here is Keith McFarland. We're not going to keep talking. As you guys know, Rick and I could talk a lot longer about all this. I could talk all day about the greatness of Keith McFarland as a man and who he is and who he's all about. But really, before we get into it, I just want you guys to know he's, as I said, the real deal, a guy who's been living with his family, loving on the people of Uganda in ways that just training them up in the ways of the gospel. He's the director of the Institute for Gospel Transformation at New Hope, Uganda. He also holds other positions there. As anybody doing ministry knows, you do a whole lot more than your title. He loves as well as anyone that I know. And he has 6 kids. He's raised them all over there in Uganda. And I do also want to say, and I'm going to talk a little bit about with him, I don't want to forget, his son, his 17-year-old son, to give you an idea, his oldest, has just started a publishing company called Publishing Peace. It's got a blog. They're going to be starting a podcast. And it just blows my mind. Like, he has a bigger staff than I have. And he's 17 years old. And I just love that to me is a mark of a man who is his father. And that's who we get to talk to today. So without any more, we're going to bring in Keith McFarland. Keith, brother, so great to have you, man. Welcome to the Think Orphan podcast.
Thanks, Phil. I'm glad to finally be on here. Thanks for bringing me in.
Yes. And one of the things I love about this kind of new format we have is you have no idea how I introduced you. So you have to wait until the episode airs to hear it. So I think your wife will agree with it. You may struggle with it. I'm not going to lie. So Keith, I introduced you a little bit. But can you just share with our audience, because really people who have read the book read a little bit about you, and if they finished it, if they read all the way through chapter 13, they heard a little bit about your story, but most people haven't read that. Most people don't know your story, don't know who you are. Can you just share a little bit about how God captured you with a love for orphan and vulnerable children, how you began working in Uganda, and just really how you got to be where you are today?
Yeah, God took me from West Virginia. So I grew up in West Virginia. Went to Chicago to Moody Bible Institute. And really from 1995 to 1999, it was like a world explosion for this kind of country city boy. Suddenly downtown Chicago, the government housing projects just a few blocks from the school at that time. And so for 4 years, I was very immersed in inner city ministry to very broken, very wounded, hurting kids. And that was just life-changing for me. By my senior year, it was like my eyes went from being open like this to like this as I began to learn about street kids, AIDS orphans, war-torn children. It blew me away. In fact, Phil, I don't even know if you know this. Like I remember being on spring break and watching something in Rwanda, and they were talking about the genocide in Rwanda and all the loss, the death, the situation with the children. And man, it was like, I was like, what genocide? Like what, what is this? It was like brand new for me. So I, 5 years later, had no idea all that had taken place. And it just, man, it was like a knife into me, and just crying out, God, where are you in this big reality, and all this. And so, and I remember just walking around school, kind of just down and a lot. And my wife was just my friend at that time. But, she'd be like, what's wrong with Keith? I'm like, the state of the world's children, everybody, like, who is this guy? But it was God just breaking me, opening my eyes up, and then just, making it really clear that I'm redeeming this brokenness, and I've entered into this brokenness, and I still enter into this brokenness through my people, through my church. And and we go, and I'm like, whoa, me. Yeah, come on. So that started me on a journey. When I graduated, I went and lived with a Zambian family and worked with street kids for 3 months, and then moved around East Africa, just checking out what was going on with children and different ministries and churches and missionaries or whoever I could connect with. And in that time, God just really confirmed his call on me in that direction. Went back to Chicago and got married. God reaffirmed that calling through the local church that I was attending. And in 2002, we hadn't even been married a year, and we found ourselves in Rwanda and Uganda, working with kids and attending at that time what was called the New Hope Institute of Child Care and Family. Man, and that was mind-blowing for us in a ministry context to children that was very different than anything I had ever seen. And just coming right into New Hope's, the very heart of it, bringing the fatherhood of God to the fatherless. And that captured our hearts. And so we went back to the States and raised support. And we've been there since 2004.
Can you share a little bit more about the Institute, what it is, and, if people out there might be interested in being a part of it potentially? Can you just share what it is, how people might get involved, how they can get in touch with you if they are interested to hear more about it? Now, obviously they can read about it in the book, but just a snippet of what it is and how people might be able to contact you if they want more info on it.
Sure. What drew us to the Institute initially was just wanting to be mentored by people on the field who were living it out the gospel in ministry, to be able to learn from their successes, their mistakes. And we had a really hard time finding anyone who was offering that kind of mentorship or discipleship. And when we learned about New Hope Uganda and the Institute, it was like, wow, okay, that's exactly what we want. Because at that time, it was a 20-week course. We've tried to shorten it down to 18 weeks right now. But it's intensive, discipleship oriented, where you are, it's multifaceted. So you have to almost imagine you're sitting in a room with Ugandans from 4, 5, 10 different tribes, different nations, different African nations, different Western nations. Not a big class, usually between 15 and 20, enough that it's intimate. You're able to know each other and be known, and you start just breaking apart culture and the impact that our cultures have played on us, forming the way that we look at God and look at each other, read the Bible, live our lives. And it's very shocking to have your own cultural worldview revealed in the light of another. My wife had taken missions classes. I had done missions and trainings on culture, but there's something about being exposed in the light of another culture. And then just having a biblical worldview just being rebuilt into us, challenging on every level for me as a man, my wife as a woman, so manhood, womanhood, marriage, family, things that I didn't get in Bible college, deeply saturated in the Word of God, foundations for God's heart for the fatherless and orphan care, grounded in the gospel. One of the things that we loved was delving into the heart of an orphan. That was one of my favorite teachings that I got to sit under, and then seeing how that leads us to the gospel and the fatherhood of God. So, it's intense. There's a lot of different pieces to it, but you're also working hands-on with New Hope and, in different areas of the ministry, whether it's the clinic or the family groups or the schools, whatever is appropriate, for that context. So, the web, so you can go on newhopeuganda.org and just look for Institute for Gospel Transformation, and any inquiries on there will make their way to me.
And I got to tell you, I wish we had an ability to do like a virtual tour or something and just be a fly on the wall for some of those conferences. I've wanted to, just be a part of it a bit more. I've met some of the people who have been in the Institute, and just seeing a little snippet of it when I was visiting. But I'm blown away hearing more and more about what you're doing with that. So I just encourage people to check it out. If that at all piqued your interest, find out more about it, because it really is amazing. And it's kind of like, I compare it to when you're learning a language. You go on Rosetta Stone, you try to learn a language, and you can kind of learn a language, but you're never going to learn a language until you go in and actually go into a country and immerse yourself into that. And I think this is like a jumping off into it, just deep end of cultural immersion, to learn about people and get to know people at deep levels, where the hard questions are asked. So I definitely I just really love what you're doing. I've always just been so encouraged by what you're doing there. So yeah, go ahead.
Just you think about, who really would go through that course? I mean, it's whether you're training in missions. We've had people that are going to different Muslim countries, African nations, Asian, wherever. We've had Indians go through. We've had pastors from America go through and then come back, almost take a sabbatical, go through and then come back into ministry. And really, from any educational level, from a Master's of Divinity level to a fourth grade village Ugandan education, it is an impacting experience for all of those levels. And the quality of teaching is amazing. And you're learning from Ugandans, you're learning from a wide spectrum of people, which I think is really special.
Yeah. And that's another thing I'm glad you touched on. It's not a bunch of Americans going over to Uganda to teach a bunch of people from all over the world. It's people that are teaching you and training you from Uganda. As you said, there's people from several different countries at New Hope, right? Working there and training and a part of that. So, okay. So, we could talk about that all day. I do want you real quick though. Can you, I want to make sure as you're answering the other questions to just share a little bit about, what New Hope is so people can understand that better too. I know that a lot of that's in the book. So I do want to invite people to the extent we can never cover all these different things in an interview. So if you really want to find out more about New Hope Uganda and its model and how it's transforming lives there, I definitely encourage you to pick up that book, because as Rick, reminded himself of this last week, if you pick up the book and you skim through it of which parts of the book Phil Dark wrote, who's on the cover, and which parts of the book Keith McFarland wrote, Keith has a lot more. I mean, he's like here. I can't even have my arm. I'm like here, right? So if you're on the video, you saw my hands that were really close together when I did my part, and you couldn't see my hands because they were so far apart with Rick's. But Rick didn't write any of it, actually.
Did not write any of this.
If we had 16 authors, it probably would have been Rick. But funny story, I'd never even met Rick until after the book was published, and then everyone said, "Oh, you wrote a book." Then Rick said, "Oh, okay, you're part of the book writer fraternity. I can come over and talk to you now." So that's kind of how it worked when we did that. But I still remember meeting Rick at Chicago, CAFO.
CAFO in Chicago.
Yeah. So anyway, that's not what this interview is about. This interview is about you, Keith. So we're going to come back to you. But I do want to kind of transition to the collaboration that did happen with In Pursuit. In all seriousness, it was a book that was always, not always. Once we went to a collaborative approach, I knew there was going to have to be somebody else that really walked alongside who took on a co-editing role, who took on a big part of writing and helping with the content editing, because I knew that it just couldn't be Phil Dark's musings and Phil Dark's editing. And a lot of people just assume we were old buds, but we didn't even meet until, was it 2013 or 12? I can't remember. It was 2012. Yeah. And the September of 12, when I started researching for this book, and somebody connected me with you. A good friend of mine from college said, "Hey, you got to check out New Hope Uganda." So I went on, looked, saw some dude's name, reached out to him. On the other end of that email was Keith. He's like, "Yeah, come stay with me. I have a guest house. I forget what you call it, but right outside my house, and my wife cuts hair. You can get your hair cut while you're here too. Yeah, no problem."
The Bonda.
And the Bonda. And I took him up on both things. And so I stayed there for 3 days, and we became brothers, like we said. Mm-hmm. So, but I want to hear from you, because I have a couple of things that I'll talk about, afterwards with Rick. But how did that process, writing a book with 15 authors, as I said, you wrote a good chunk of it. You co-edited with me. Can you share your perspective kind of on the good, bad, and ugly of the collaborative writing process? And do you believe the collaboration is worth the struggle and the hard work that it takes to make it happen?
Come on. Right. Absolutely. Has to be. And I think when you talk about the good, the good was the fact that collaboration happened and the book was put out there. Without, of course, people reading the book aren't going to know how hard it is to actually find collaboration in the orphan care world. And I was pretty surprised. Even just in my little experience in Uganda, you find most organizations, everybody's their own expert. You've got your own study, your own experience, your own, ways of doing things. And at the end of the day, it's easy to want to be heard and very hard to hear and to listen and to want to listen and to learn. And collaboration really forces that. It forces you to have to critically evaluate, to think beyond your experience, to think beyond your exposure, and to be able to learn from others. And there's a give and take in that type of dialogue. So for the book, luckily, I don't ever feel like it was that difficult. The people that God brought into the book very much had hearts to want to see the kingdom of God going forth in good orphan care, right? To see it done well. And I think most of us have tasted enough of bad orphan care to know that, man, this is a need. We've got to get this done. This has to be done right. So I think that definitely provides a good fuel for working through some of the challenges and getting things together and getting it put out there. So yeah, I think working through those challenges, but we had a good team, and Phil Dark, he's pretty good with people, and hitting it on point. So you made it easy.
Easy. I don't know about easy. There, I can close my eyes and remember some moments that I would not define it easy. So you skipped the two parts of that question. It was a 3-part question. You covered the good. What were some of the hard parts? What were some of the things that were struggles that when people are going through collaboration, there will be struggles. There will be road bumps, speed bumps, whatever, hurdles, whatever you want to call them. What were some of the ones that you felt, and we felt together, but I'd like to hear from your perspective.
Well, you're going to have challenges where you're coming from a perspective of study or academia. You're going to have challenges where you're just coming from experience and without really study or digging deep or going broad. There's going to be limitations on those realities. And I think anywhere that fear of man, fear of how am I going to be perceived, what's driving sort of how I'm coming at some of these things, those are challenges, right? Is the gospel really the center of what we're doing and how we're doing things? Is what I'm bringing more of a Western context? Does this translate internationally? Does this translate in an African context? Does this translate over here? And just, weeding through some of those challenges, difficulties, and trying to get it to where it's able to touch the roots. I think it's because it's easy to stay up here theoretically without really digging down. How do we bring this down to the people who are actually caring for orphans? Is this actually tangible, what we're calling people to? What does this look like without forsaking excellence, right? How do we practically do it? So to me, those were the challenges that I walked through.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember we were in freezing cold West Virginia in December of 2013, and we were editing it, and I remember some conversations with people on that very thing, that theory practice gap, that there were some minor worldview differences, major ones, but just little ones. But when you're getting it in black and white, it's tough. It's tough because all our names are on these pages, right? And you remember the conversations, and people were like, can you just say that we wrote that together and that it's not my chapter because I feel like you've totally changed it? And there were conversations like that, and it's hard because it is a balance, But anyway, that's the part of the fun. So
yeah, but it's worth it, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Keith, I want to jump in, and first of all, man, I really, one of the things that I was kind of eager to hear a little bit more about, that hopefully we can kind of get into, is even the name change of the Institute and the Institute for Gospel Transformation, and I think it really kind of plays into what you and Phil were just talking about, that we do bring these different perspectives and bring different angles, but the thing that really unifies us in what we do is Christ, and it's the story of the gospel, and there's a unifying factor to why we do what we do, who we do what we do for, and those ends that cause us to stay in this and cause us to to collaborate deeply. It also really informs like the things that we champion and the stuff that we center our ministries on. And I know, looking at chapter 4 in the book that you guys wrote is just seeing your passion for the critical importance of family and how that, how that comes from a Christ-centered worldview, and realizing how important a mom and a dad are. But also realizing that some of the things I've, through the book and other things I've been able to see, that you talk about this idea. It's kind of something that you guys at New Hope have built your have built your ministry around, is this idea of bringing the fatherhood of God to the fatherless, and that, kind of that primacy. So, I mean, if you would just kind of delve into a little bit of your thinking about the importance of family, and how the scriptures guide us to value family, but then also like how that idea then translates to how we really know and experience God, and the way that all of those forces kind of shape together.
Boy, I wish we had 3 or 4 hours, maybe a week, right? Because that, Rick, what you just brought, I mean, that's beautiful, right? That's what we want to glory in and bask in. And I think, because the reality is that orphan care is always birthed out of suffering, right? It's like we talk about adoption. Adoption is always birthed out of suffering, and just recognizing that. And so it's easy to look around at the reality of brokenness that is around us, because it's brokenness. There's no perfect place for orphans in a broken world where they aren't going to touch brokenness, whether it's relatives or whether it's being adopted into family or whether it's in an orphan care community or wherever you go. I mean, that's a reality. And yet, in the midst of that brokenness, God has spoken. And it's not spoken in a should I go left or should I go right? Let's go left. It's spoken in that this is the way. This is what I have designed. This is what I have given. And everything within us longs for family. I mean, even when you're dealing with broken family, there's that ache, right? Because we were made to yearn for home, but not a permanent home here. We're not going to find a permanent home here. No matter what home you get put into, eventually death is going to find you. We're all going to face fatherlessness. We're all going to face that rending and the pain of living in this broken world, because we were made for a permanent home where God is, where we are with God. God is with his people. That's where home is, right? You can hear Jesus saying, I will come and dwell with them and make our home with them. What an amazing statement. And so just as much as we were made for home, we get a taste of home in this world, and it's a mirror, right? And so in that, it's like, hey, these are aspects of what my eternal home is going to be like. And you know what? There's really good news that my eternal home isn't going to be like this, and it's the same as we look into God's design for parents, because God has given father and mother, just as he made Adam and Eve in his image and his likeness, this man and this woman imaging their creator. Unbelievable. And in that imaging of their creator, they are having children, and family is created, this earthly family that's pointing to a greater heavenly reality that is eternal, right? It's not going to end. That's where we're going. There's something bigger than this. And so even as we look at this design of a man and a woman coming together and then having children and having a home that is affected by sin and isn't permanent, but in that, God powerfully reveals himself. And one of the things that I've loved is been studying through scripture and just watching how God unveils his character. And as you move through Old Testament, a lot of us, we just resonate more with the king image of God in the Old Testament, because it's there, it's glorious, it moves right through the storyline. But there's another really fascinating unveiling of God, and that's that God is Father from the beginning. He's not just the king in the garden, issuing orders and commands like the king. He is Father. He's brought his children into the world, and he's provided everything that they need, and he's disciplining them, and he's sending them out of the garden. And sorry, I better not preach. But
no, man, go.
Right.
Go. This is good.
Come on.
This is good.
But as we move through the storyline, you see this unveiling of God's fatherhood, and there it is, over and over. But one of the things that I love is the unveiling of God's fatherhood through his passion for the fatherless. And it is just this unique theme. Unlike, to me, it's unlike any other theme. The fatherless, the widow, and then the sojourner gets tucked right in there. And when David comes along in Psalm 68 and says, a father to the fatherless is God in his holy dwelling, he's not pulling that out of thin air. He's pulling that right out of the Pentateuch, right out of his meditations on the law. He has seen the God who's revealed himself as father to the fatherless. That comes through his meditation on the law and his delighting in God. And he sees and that God is father to the fatherless. And then he goes on to say, God settles the lonely in family. And that's what he does. He's constantly using family to draw in the fatherless, and for the fatherless to know that God is their father, right? And that's life-changing. And that leads us right into the gospel as we get to celebrate the doctrine of justification, that we are forgiven, right? We are set free from the curse and punishment of sin, and then we are adopted into his family. So the image of this really being reflected through redeemed men and women, reflecting Christ and reflecting the Father, God, drawing children into relationship with Christ where they get to know their Father, right? So God, the Father, still being imaged through earthly fathers and earthly mothers. But there's something unique about fatherhood. And, you always feel the crushing weight of Ephesians 6, right? Fathers, train up your children in, but it's mothers too. It's not as mothers are put aside, but there's something about God revealing his fatherhood through fathers, and where you don't see fathers, where are you going to see God's fatherhood? I love the passage in Ephesians, I think it's Ephesians 4, when Paul says, for this reason I bow my knees before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth is named. And the Greek, the original language, it's fatherhood. So for this reason, I bow my knees before the Father, from whom every fatherhood on heaven and earth is named. And so I think that God's design, really from the beginning and right through redemption, is that fatherhood is revealed most powerfully through earthly fathers that are imaging him, and through mothers who are also imaging Christ and revealing God, and then drawing hearts into that place. So that
is so good. And like, I had no idea that we were going to, transition from an interview to just having church. Like, that was, it was amazing. I think in the very homespun way that I've communicated that over the years, is this idea that in us stepping into ministry in the fatherless, in Jesus' name, we have this opportunity to sort of put a taste on the lips of the world, kind of this sample of the kingdom of God, right? Like, we point to God's fatherhood and to the to the redeeming and the restoration and the completion that that Christ achieves in his work. And man, that was so good. If you're listening to us, go back and listen to that entire answer again. Conserve that, chew on that, because that is a beautiful articulation of why we do what we do. And so, Keith, thanks for that.
It's also real quick, Rick. It's also a good sampling of why I loved that Keith was a part of the book.
That's awesome.
And it's also the reason why our conversations typically go for an hour and a half every time we get on the phone, because we tend to go pretty deep, pretty quick, and it's just awesome. And I learned so much from this man. So that's why I was so excited to get him on. I know it doesn't seem like it since it's episode 152 and we're finally getting him on, but I have been really excited to get this man on this show.
I was just sitting here thinking as you were answering, going, man, we're going to make good on that 3 or 4 hours at some point, and really dwell over it. We have to do that. Well, Keith, I think any of us that have ever, written anything and put it out there for other people, there's the counterbalance of, you step away from that experience and some days pass, some years pass, whatever, and you kind of look back at some of the things that you've written and go, man, I wish I had said X, or I wish I could change Y. Like, there's always that, whenever you put it into a fixed time and a fixed place, you'd love to be able to qualify some of that. I'm curious, man, just knowing how thoughtful you are, what would be some things that you might point to from In Pursuit that you would say today, man, if I had a chance to do this today, knowing what I know now and knowing where I am with the Lord now, I would change this, or I would do this today?
I know that early on, one of the first things Phil and I talked about was wishing that we had put something in there more for the gatekeepers, those who are in contact with the neediest of the needy children, those who are sort of the ones bringing in and dealing with fatherless children on the ground. I think that would have been really, really helpful for sure. As I've sort of thought about it since then, and looking back, really your question, I think I would have loved to have done a little bit more coming out of chapter 4, the family chapter. I think it was so much that really is the crux, right, of where the book is going to go, and what the heart is that we're trying to bring. We're trying to say we want to see that family, that fathers and mothers, that God's design in this, that this isn't just an optional thing. It's not just good to have fathers. Like, we want to say, man, it's a must. Like, at least we have to strive for that, right? And there's a reason, and we want to see that grounded biblically. So I think I would have loved to have done more, I think, on the foundational pieces, a little bit more in even the scriptural side of some of the foundations for orphan ministry that just walk through scripture. Those can get big, but if I were to pick one, okay, so if you nail me down and say, well, what's the one thing? It would be this. And I haven't even said this to Phil. Honestly, I would want a chapter on the central calling and place of the local church. Mm. And, I've worked with, I've worked with organizations and NGO all across the board from 1995 up to current. So, I guess that's 25 years of working with at-risk children in lots of different contexts. And the one common thing that I have found that's really missing is pretty consistently, is a passion for the centrality of the church. And, and it's good that New Hope Ugandas exist, right? It's good that just start naming good organizations that are trying to do it right. That's wonderful. But those organizations aren't going to be here, in 20 years, 50 years, 100 years. The church will be here. And we have to be passionate for Christ's design. He's given the local church to be his primary means of caring for the fatherless. And so, it can flow out of that in part, that New Hope Ugandas or other organizations, like our heart and passion as organizations, has to be to strengthen the local church, and wherever that is, right? And to not exist outside of that. Like, we desperately need the church. And of course, that's a big answer, right? I could spend a lot of time on that, but
no, man, but that is so solid. And I think, I'm going to give away a trade secret here. Okay. Because this is one of those things at Lifeline that we say internally to each other a lot, is we remind our team all the time that we want to be a bridesmaid to the bride of Christ.
Yeah.
That this idea that, that we in the parachurch, it means just what it means. We're to come alongside, we're to support, but at the end of the day, Christ died for the church, right? And I love just the awareness. And I'm telling you, I don't think that's another chapter. I think that's a book. Like, I think there is so much, both theologically and practically, just to unpack about the ways that we have, that we've been, really probably incredibly short-sighted, particularly in the 20th and 21st century, about accomplishing the function of things that we know even biblically that should be done, but not honoring the way that God has called us to do it, which is through his church. And it's through that one thing that we have the promise in the scriptures that's going to endure. And man, that's so good. Like, I think so. I'm telling you right now, that's your next book.
So you're writing it with Rick. You're going to write that next book with Rick. It will be called Orphanology in the Church.
Right.
All right.
Right.
in
Yes.
pursuit of
Oh,
orphanology and the church
Well, if we're going to make it
for
we got
excellence.
ecclesiological orphanology. There you
Oh,
go.
yeah,
that's
right.
way too big
How's
of
that?
that's too way too
Well,
big of words.
let's
I
just go in
wouldn't.
vogue. Let's just do
Yeah.
global centered orphanology in the church, right?
Yeah.
Like if it's gospel centered, it's got to fly these days,
Yeah.
Let's
right?
do it. So, real quick, Keith, you're
Yeah,
bringing it
yeah.
back, which we got to do. So, what? There's one thing that we have had people not criticize necessarily, but ask questions about what we actually meant with you talked about it with the fatherhood and the fathers and mothers, and when there's no father, there's something missing, and some people misinterpret that to say, well, single moms, what, they can't raise kids, like, are they not good enough? What's going on there, right? And people, as we all know, people will misinterpret what we say,
Mm-hmm.
and what we write, especially because we see it with social media all the time. People put in black and white different things, and you have 20,000 or 20 million or 20, however many billion people we have that many different interpretations. But I just want to give you a chance to, I know we've talked about it, and I know you've talked about it on some different things, but what would you say to somebody who said, well, I'm a single mom, and what are you saying to me, that my kids don't have a chance? What's going on here? Thanks again, Keith, for sharing your great wisdom with us in part one of our interview with you. Folks, I know you're going to want to come back for part two next episode, because Keith not only will answer the question that we left off with, but he will also share a lot more wisdom about different parts of the book, different lessons he's learned over the last decade or so of work with New Hope Uganda. And also, as always, he will also be sharing his recommendations and just books he's learned from and people he's learned from over his time working with orphan and vulnerable children. So, as always, folks, we hope and pray that you will take everything you've learned today, everything that you're reading and you're watching and you're listening to, and you'll use it to help you to understand how you can love orphaned and vulnerable children better and better each and every day. Thanks a lot. Have a great week.